This is episode 145 of Living Outside the Matrix.
Lawful Rebel,
Comprehensive goals.
Lawful Rebel,
Active minds, open doors.
Lawful Rebel,
You can see the signs. If you read between the lines.
Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the show where we examine important issues either ignored or misrepresented in the mainstream narrative. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and on the show today we are going to examine the idea of why you must be your own healthcare provider, and also a little glimpse and a few pointers into how to achieve that. And the essence of the message in this show is that the conventional model of health, the conventional paradigm, if you like, that dominates modern healthcare, is outdated. It not only doesn't work, but it also is part of the mechanism of developing more and more reliance on government, on the state, and therefore predisposing us, if you like, to giving up more and more of our freedom. Because essentially the concepts of health and disease are intimately related, and they're of obvious crucial importance to every single one of us. But these concepts have been hijacked, if you like, and they are being misrepresented in a way that doesn't serve us. It certainly doesn't serve our health, and it in particular doesn't serve our long-term interests with regards to freedom and the political direction in which most countries of the world, certainly Western civilization as a whole, is heading at the moment. So what is this mainstream model of health and disease? What is this dominant paradigm? Let's just dissect that for a few moments. The conventional mainstream way of regarding health and disease sets us at war with nature and the natural environment. It's a model that considers all microbes out there and the natural environment as a potential threat. If you like, it's a malevolent view of the universe. And here we are always attempting to defend ourselves from attack from all the microbes, bacteria, these things they call viruses, fungi, all of these tiny particles which are numbering in the trillions all around us. They're essentially impossible to get away from. But this model sets us against all of that. It considers them the enemy, and it views us as vulnerable and desperately trying to prevent attack, as it's called, from all of these germs. And the model essentially rests on the unproven assumption of germ theory, which I would strongly advocate that you look into. But it's much more than that. There are more problems associated with this model. One of them is that it's a model that fosters helplessness in the individual and a kind of a dependence on the big pharmaceutical corporations and the national healthcare systems of countries. It's a system that supports disease management as opposed to the prevention or cure of any disease or the promotion of health and well-being. And the solutions are always alleged to be expensive drugs or expensive medical interventions, things like replacing various body parts, hip replacements and expensive surgeries and so forth, and also along with expensive vaccinations to allegedly protect us from the invasive and the nature of all of these microbes around us and the ubiquitous sort of threat of infectious disease. So it's a model that really supports dependency as opposed to helplessness and dependency, as opposed to self-reliance. And at the same time, of course, it generates huge amounts of profits for its practitioners at yours and my expense. The whole approach neatly ties pharmaceutical corporations to their prime customers, which would be governments with their national healthcare systems, such as the NHS here in the UK. And governments then take the resources from their citizens in the form of taxation, and they constitute a guaranteed customer for these expensive treatments. And it's interesting to note that this tag team of big business with the state, which is often sort of spun and marketed as public-private partnerships, certainly is here in England, but this is in fact the essence of fascism. When corporate interests, big corporations, team up with governments, this is really the definition of fascism. So we need to be aware of that. Let's examine the reasons then that we should specifically seek to avoid this kind of mainstream model of health and disease, which is exclusively promoted by your conventional doctor, by the establishment, by governments, and in the mainstream narrative as a whole. There are very specific and easy to grasp reasons that this whole a conventional approach should be rejected, this whole approach to health and disease, these two closely related concepts. So the first broad category that I want to discuss is that it doesn't work. This model doesn't serve you and me. It doesn't actually produce health. So why doesn't it do that? Well, for a start, it treats symptoms with drugs. And now this is simply wrong for three very important reasons. Firstly, it doesn't address the root cause of illness. The idea of treating symptoms is inherently disinterested in causes. It's not about treating the causes, it's about alleviating symptoms. Secondly, drugs have a wide range of effects on the human body, most of which, or indeed many of which, are detrimental. And what is commonly done is that one is singled out, one effect is singled out and championed as the effect of this drug, and it cures this symptom, while the rest of those effects are bundled together and just mentioned as as an aside in the small print, and these are called side effects. So these side effects will be causing you harm, and this is unacceptable. And the third point is that this is essentially a system of disease management. It's not preventing any disease, it's not curing anything, and it's not an approach that does anything to promote wellness and health. It's simply disease management. The second fundamental problem with the mainstream paradigm is that it holds that disease is directly linked to, if not caused by, genetics. A lot of the diseases we get are allegedly in our genes. And this approach disregards the role of the environment. It disregards environmental toxicity as a cause, and it supports the position of ignoring that toxicity that we find in food and in agriculture, in the water supply, in things that we use every day, in furniture, in paints, in fragrances, in sun cream, and also the toxicity that is generated in our cells as a result of EMF exposure, etc., etc. And there are many examples of toxicity that we are exposed to. So this whole approach ignores all of that toxicity and just seeks to carry on prescribing these essentially toxic drugs to alleviate only the symptoms. And furthermore, this supports the idea that of the inevitability, if you like, of disease. It's in your genes and there's nothing you can do about it. This is inherently disempowering, and it gives you the idea that there's nothing you can do but go back to the pharmaceutical companies and try to take a pill to cure whatever ill it is that you're suffering from. The mainstream conventional approach treats many common ailments with antibiotics. This is another major failing, and the word antibiotic, if you track its roots in the Greek, means anti-life. And the killing off of bacteria is done almost indiscriminately. Certainly doctors here in the United Kingdom, for any cold or any flu, certainly historically prior to this alleged pandemic, anything like that, I've been many times prescribed antibiotics. It's a sort of a catch-all treatment. And it's based again on the assumption, the germ theory assumption, that these bacteria are actually causing any problem. But the result is a huge reduction in the number and diversity of gut microbes in the body, and this sort of anti-life approach really is destroying the whole base of human health. You've probably heard the saying that all disease begins in the gut, and conversely health starts in the gut. And if we wipe out large sections of our, or large populations I should say, of our gut flora, we are not doing anything there to support health. This is a very misguided approach. So the second major reason to reject this mainstream medical paradigm is because it undermines your self-reliance, and it fosters a sort of a helplessness and a dependence on the interests that benefit subsequently from your illness. And at its worst, in fact, it leads to our enslavement. It leads to a greater and greater reliance on the state, as I alluded to earlier. This is the model that's being used to usher in tyranny in this medical mafia and the biosecurity state that we're seeing these days, that ultimately will be deciding who is safe to walk free in society and who is not. It's this mainstream model, this mainstream paradigm, that has created vast wealth through the cosy relationship between big pharma and corrupt government, or not created vast wealth, but rather expropriated vast wealth through the sale of these symptom-treating drugs, etc. And it removes effectively your personal choice from the equation, and tends to sort of substitute government force in the form of taxation to pay for and implement its claimed solutions, drugs and vaccinations. And these days now we are seeing that the bogus pandemic using the false premise of germ theory to bring about the final closure of the prison gates on our freedom. And I strongly suspect that we will soon see quarantine substituted for detention without trial. We will soon see total control justified on this false premise, with quarantine zones, travel restrictions, and even special camps being used to quarantine the allegedly infected. So these are the dangers of this mainstream modern sort of health paradigm as still prevailing. But there is a new model emerging. So let's take a look at what this is. It's alternative for sure, and in my view, it's quite beautiful because it supports self-empowerment, it supports independence, but not only that, it actually delivers genuine health and well-being as well as human freedom. So this is very, very exciting. The new model asks what causes disease and what causes health. It sees health as a consequence of right living, of the appropriate lifestyle choices, and illness as a result of the poor lifestyle choices or wrong living. Health under this new model is viewed more as a personal achievement, resulting when all of the necessary considerations are made with regards to our lifestyle choices and appropriate action taken. Another key characteristic about this new approach is that the environment is acknowledged as playing a key role. And this means that not only the external environment must be free of toxicity, but also the internal environment, which of course is the blood. That must be suitable. It must be, which is affected, of course, by nutrition and what we eat and various other factors. So the internal environment of the body is referred to as the terrain, and thus you may have heard the term terrain theory, or the phrase terrain theory, as a label for this new medical paradigm, this new model of health and disease. And interestingly enough, it's directly opposed to germ theory and was historically presented by Antoine Béchamp, who was a medical man in the 1800s and if you like, an adversary of Louis Pasteur, who was advocating germ theory at around about the same time. So these two theories do stand pretty much in direct opposition to each other, in that one values the terrain, the environment, the body, nutrition, etc., and the other simply sees all of these bugs and microbes and tiny particles as the enemy. So this is the fundamental difference. Terrain theory recognizes that microbes are everywhere, that they're unavoidable, and it implicitly regards the idea of fearing them as irrational, which of course it is. Our bodies are full of billions of bacteria, fungi, these things they call viruses, and all these other microorganisms. They're in our gut, as I've mentioned. They encompass all of our organs. They're everywhere. They're absolutely ubiquitous in the environment around us. No surface is ever germ-free in that sense of referring into all these microbes as germs. So that's another key characteristic of this terrain theory, is that it recognizes the unavoidable nature of all of these tiny particles and the futility of pitching ourselves against them. Some even theorize that we evolved from these tiny microbes. But even if we didn't, we've certainly been living with them a long time and coexisting with them quite adequately for some time. Those people who achieve good health and a long health span right now are doing so in that same environment of all these germs as the people that are supposedly developing illness as a result of them. So we can see a big inconsistency there. But whichever way you look at it, these microbes are part of the terrain, and they also play many beneficial functions. Most notably, bacteria serve as nature's recyclers, you could say. They actually digest and recycle decaying organic matter. It's the byproducts often of large colonies of bacteria. Their toxic byproducts, if you like, their excretions, which can cause a problem. It's not necessarily the presence of the bacteria themselves. So this essentially is the new model of health and disease, and it goes by the name sometimes integrative medicine, functional medicine, alternative medicines. A lot of these new approaches are picking up various components of this new approach, and thus are in opposition to the main medical paradigm that dominates at the moment. But not many of them are actually challenging germ theory, and this is important because germ theory really is a crucial foundation stone of the old model, and interestingly is the foundation for the whole concept of viruses and vaccinations, which are so harmful. So the new model, terrain theory, asks what causes disease. And of course that question is not asked conventionally in the mainstream model. And when we proceed to look at all the evidence, when all the facts are considered, without the riding purely on assumption, which is what the mainstream model does, when you consider things like the crucial role of the gut and the microbiome, it concludes that toxicity is a major cause of disease, malnutrition or inappropriate nutrition is the second, and trauma is the third. These are the main three categories of disease causation. It therefore rejects the contradiction that is germ theory and everything downstream of that assumption, including vaccinations. So similarly, terrain theory asks what causes health, and by addressing nutrition and removing all forms of toxicity and supporting the rest of the body's needs, such as for adequate hydration and various other means of supporting our immune system through earthing and other such practices, it recognizes the causes of health. So obviously if we avoid bodily injury, and we attend to these concepts of nutrition and toxicity avoidance, this is the means by which we can achieve the result that is health through appropriate lifestyle choices. And it can't be overestimated what a powerful and significant effect our diet has on toxicity. Most food these days is toxic, and most people fail to adequately nourish themselves. So this suggests a huge amount that we can do in terms of empowering ourselves. So it's in all of our interests to embrace this new model of health and recognizing the genuine causes of disease. It's empowering. And it puts the individual into the driving seat. There is no need to think that we are condemned by our genetic inheritance for a start. We can take control of our health outcome, and to the extent that we can take control of our lifestyle choices and the environment in which we live. But even more than this, it removes the power of the state, and that tag team partnership between the state and the pharmaceutical industry. And it does this by rendering them irrelevant. There is no need for them. Nobody needs a healthcare system under this new model. We become our own healthcare system. No one needs to be dependent and at the mercy of powers that are beyond their control. And nobody has to rely on an alleged or so-called service that actually binds them to the state. The other component here is that if we do still cling to our mainstream healthcare systems to manage, our ailments as we get older and our aches and pains. And if we engage with that system, or we seek to engage in that system it can't cure us, it can't prevent disease. All it can do is manage really our ailments. But if we engage with that system on the assumption, or if we're labouring under the belief that they can help us, we're going to find that very soon you'll need to be vaccinated to qualify, if you like, for their treatments. And that is not something that will promote your health, it will undermine it. So that's a very, very important thing to bear in mind, is that if we want freedom, if we really want genuine health outcomes in the long term, we really need to divorce ourselves from the idea of dependence on this old system, and we need to embrace a new system. And unfortunately, there is a price to pay in that respect, and it comes in the form of taking personal responsibility and the extent to which we can manage our lives and choose our lifestyle choices that support this outcome that is health. Taking personal responsibility for our health involves adopting a rational hierarchy of values that holds mental and physical health, our overall well-being, as the top priority that it should be. Currently, of course, most people prefer to avoid that responsibility, and for example, if we eat exclusively for taste rather than for conscious nourishment, we can see there that the option of taking personal responsibility would be to shift away from that and to begin to eat for taste and health. We don't have to throw out the idea of eating delicious foods. This does not need to be given up at all. In fact, on the conversely, I'd say there's a whole host of new flavors to be discovered. But we do need to wean ourselves off, the sort of Coca-Cola, pizza and Pringles culture that many of us are still tempted by. This approach also represents a huge personal growth opportunity. The discipline, the interrelating aspects of all lifestyle choices around hydration, exercise, sleep, nutrition, stress management, all of these components need to be addressed together, which is not only challenging, but it's as rewarding as it is challenging. And of course, the ultimate prize, which is independently achieved optimal health and longevity, the value of that prize really can't be overstated. So let's go back to the point that health is an achievement that proceeds from the correct life-supporting lifestyle choices. And that means the sort of choices that you make every moment of every day. And that is things like what you choose to eat and the quality of that food, how much sleep you get and the quality of that sleep, how much you hydrate your body and the quality of that hydration, the quality of your water supply. It's to do with how much you allow your body to be exposed to toxicity and how much you deliberately avoid it and deliberately detoxify. How much do we practice things that can detoxify us, whether it be through saunas or through various things like zeolite, etc., etc. Then there's how much do we expose ourselves to electromagnetic fields, or how much do we avoid them. This has a huge impact on generating toxicity inside every cell of the body. Then there's how much do we choose to move and exercise, how much stress we're under, and whether or not we have any kind of strategy to manage it. And of course, whether or not we get the appropriate sun exposure that we desperately need, and also the connection to the earth for all of those free electrons which support the activities of the immune system. The effect of all of these sorts of choices in these key areas impacts on our body's ability to continuously repair itself and effectively remove toxins. This process of cause and effect can take years or decades, and it does require a considerable amount of long-term thinking. We have to think and plan for health 10 years hence, 20 years hence. It's not something where we see the effects immediately. My children always pull me up on this one because clearly they can go out and binge on sweets and crisps and cakes and candy floss at the fairground without feeling any ill effects, and they distrust this idea that you need to plan for the long term because, of course, they can't see any short-term ill effects. But as we get older and wiser, we can clearly see this need, this conceptual seeing and grasping of the need to plan long term. By way of conclusion, health is just one of the major misrepresentations of our time. But the whole paradigm of health and disease in the mainstream narrative is essentially upside down and back to front. The dominant assumption that there's a pill for every ill tends to make people think that they can live forever without consequences and that they don't need to worry about those consequences. And of course, this extends to the idea of taking a vaccination to help with alleged immunity against any alleged condition. And the truth really is that personal responsibility is required to choose the correct lifestyle choices that deliver the result that is good health. And one of the key fundamentals of the dominant false paradigm is germ theory. But the good news is that this is a false assumption that is finally being dismantled by some very courageous doctors, virologists, and professionals who are exposing this myth and the evidence that contradicts it, and indeed the lack of evidence that supports it. People like Dr. Stefan Lanka, Dr. Tom Cowan, Dr. Andy Kaufman, etc. There are many more, too many to mention, but the Global Alliance of Doctors, there's a growing voice that recognizes that there is something deeply wrong with the current model. So I hope this helps inspire you maybe towards becoming more health aware. This need to be not self-reliant on the state, and also there is no need to fear a lot of the chronic diseases like cancer, diabetes, dementia, heart disease. All of these diseases are lifestyle choice preventable. Diet or poor diet or incorrect diet, plays a large part in the development of these diseases and conditions, and they are developed over years and decades. And it's very important to remember that we really bring about these diseases through our lifestyle choices that we make and our ignorance of the impact that each one of those choices has. So the solution is very, very much outside of the system. It's very much outside of the matrix. And if you have any kind of health condition, or if you know somebody that has, and they fear divorcing themselves from the state, if you like, they fear the idea of leaving the national health service of whatever country that they're in behind them, and sort of go it alone, if you like, in the way that I'm advocating. They fear this because they maybe don't understand that the result is, or the result of health can easily be achieved without the aid of this conventional way of looking at disease and its management. So, as usual, I urge you to visit the website, lawfulrebel.com. There's lots more on there. Of course, the blog post associated with this podcast is on there as well. And do check out all of the extensive information on there about how we can achieve health. I've been a passionate self-educator in the area of health for approximately 10 years. And I have convinced myself and many others of how achievable health is if we step outside of this conventional model. So thank you very much for listening, and I do hope you'll join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.